Good morning, I'm Taylor Wilson, and today is Friday, September 26, 2025. This is USA Today's The Excerpt. Today, what we know about the indictment of former FBI Director James Comey, plus the latest from Dallas after this week's shooting on an ICE facility, and the clock is ticking to avoid a government shutdown. A federal grand jury has indicted former FBI Director James Comey on charges of lying to Congress and obstruction. Those allegations come after a years-long tumultuous relationship with President Donald Trump, who fired Comey for investigating his 2016 campaign's contacts with Russia. The indictment centers on testimony made by Comey in September of 2020. Prosecutors claim Comey falsely said that he had not authorized someone else at the FBI to be an anonymous source in news reports regarding an FBI investigation. Much of Comey's testimony that day focused on the FBI's investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election to benefit Trump. Ultimately, special counsel Robert Mueller concluded there was not sufficient evidence that the Trump campaign coordinated with Russia. Comey said on Instagram that his heart is broken for the Department of Justice, but that he has great confidence in the federal judicial system. He added, quote, "I'm innocent, so let's have a trial and keep the faith my family and I have known for years," unquote. Trump posted on Truth Social celebrating the indictment and calling Comey one of the worst human beings this country has ever been exposed to. You can read more on usatoday.com. We're learning more about the shooting this week on a U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement field office in Dallas. Officials said the man who fatally shot one detainee and wounded two others had specifically intended to kill ICE agents. I spoke with USA Today national correspondent Rick Jervis for more from Dallas and how we still know little about the victims. Rick, thank you so much for joining me.
Good to be here.
So, Rick, I talked about this on my show a little bit yesterday morning. What happened in this attack? What have we learned?
Federal authorities released the actual name of the suspected shooter, and they say Joshua John, age 29. He's from a north suburb of Dallas. They basically said that Joshua John, at around 3 a.m. Wednesday morning, was basically seen driving around close to this ICE facility with a large ladder on his truck, and that he drove up to this ICE processing facility. He drove to the neighborhood, and he drove around back. And around back, there's a large parking lot that separates the actual facility from the rest of the neighborhood. And he drove up to a building, a two-story building that's directly behind it, used this large ladder to climb up to the roof of the building. And at around 6:30 a.m., he opened fire with an 8mm bolt-action rifle and just started firing shots at the ICE facility, which is about 450 feet away, roughly. And he started firing. He hit the building several times, and then he started firing at this van used to transport detainees. And inside that van were a number of detainees. These are immigrants who have been picked up by ICE in their deportation sweeps. Several of them managed to flee the actual bus and get away. And there were a couple of them, and it's unclear if they were restrained inside of the bus or to the bus, but there were a few who weren't able to leave the bus. And those are the ones who were struck by the gunman's bullets. One of them died, and two of them were critically injured.
Okay, and what do we know about those victims at this point, Rick? And I guess why don't we know more?
Unfortunately, yes, we don't know a lot about them right now. Multiple press conferences that federal agencies have had, they've said very little about who the actual detainees are. All we know for sure now is that one of them was a Mexican national, and we only know that because the Mexican consulate in Dallas basically released a statement stating so. We don't know anything about the other two. We don't know where they're from. We don't know how long they've been in the country. We don't know why they were picked up, and we don't know their actual immigration status, whether they were here without documentation or whether they had documentation or whether even they were U.S. citizens or permanent residents. We just don't know anything about them so far. I actually spoke to a couple of immigrant advocates and immigrant attorneys here in the Dallas area, and a lot of them voiced a lot of frustration that there hasn't been more details about the actual detainees, that they really want to know more about who these people were and why they were in that van when the suspect started firing.
You know, Rick, this violence comes amid a national backdrop of new tactics under the Trump administration by ICE. Can you put that in context for us?
Well, there's been a lot of controversy over how ICE has been picking up a lot of these detainees. There's been a lot of controversy around some of the tactics used, including using unmarked vans. Sometimes the agents themselves are not actually identifying themselves. A lot of times they don't have warrants. They seem to be just picking up people who look like they might be immigrants. And so there's been a lot of pushback. There's been a lot of protesting against them. There has been a lot of demonizing of these agents. I talked to one immigrant attorney who said he has a really good, close relationship with ICE, and he spends a lot of time talking to them, trying to get answers from them, but that he has felt a real difference in the sort of relationship now and just in the temperature of what's happening now with all of these increased enforcement actions, and that it just feels different. So there's a lot of tension out there, and this is just going to ratchet that up.
Well, in terms of where we go from here, Rick, I know the Department of Homeland Security announced plans to beef up security at ICE facilities, correct?
That's right. They basically announced that they will be hardening a lot of the ICE facilities out there. Wouldn't give a lot of detail into what that's going to look like, but they are very conscious of ICE facilities becoming targets. And their plan is to really beef that up and make it harder to pull off things like this.
All right. Rick Jervis is a national correspondent with USA Today joining us from Dallas. Thank you, Rick.
Thank you.
Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has ordered some 800 senior military leaders stationed around the world to attend a last-minute meeting in Northern Virginia next week. According to the Washington Post, which first reported the meeting, all senior officers above the rank of brigadier general must attend. Such a meeting with senior leadership would normally be planned months in advance, and senior military officials in some cases command thousands of troops. Most also have detailed schedules weeks in advance, which have now been upended. You can read more with a link in today's show notes. The White House is raising the government shutdown stakes with a mass firings threat. I spoke with USA Today congressional reporter Zach Shermley for more. Zach, always good to have you stop by.
Thanks, Taylor.
So what is the White House warning here about potential mass firings?
So, the Office of Management and Budget said in a memo to federal agencies on Wednesday that those agencies needed to be prepared for potential reductions in force over the course of the second Trump administration. There have been a significant number of reductions in force across federal agencies since Trump took office again, to the point that roughly 300,000 federal workers are going to have left the workforce by the end of this year, officials have said. To put that in context, in September 2024, there were roughly 2.3 million federal workers. So that's a pretty significant piece of the entirety of the federal workforce.
Well, Zach, have we seen this play out before in this way as it pertains to federal workers and shutdowns?
Yeah, typically what happens during a shutdown is that federal workers are furloughed. So there's this determination that the federal government makes between whether or not a particular employee in a government agency, and these are agencies, I should remind folks, Taylor, that are across the country, right? Federal workers don't just work in Washington, D.C. and Virginia. So the government determines which of those workers are essential versus non-essential. Examples of essential government jobs are typically in fields like law enforcement, and non-essential workers can include folks like National Parks Service employees. And so furloughs is what typically happen, and some workers have to get on the job without pay, and then lawmakers typically then go back and ensure that they can get some form of back pay, while others just sort of sit twiddling their thumbs waiting for lawmakers to reach a deal to bring them back.
Well, Zach, Minority Leader Chuck Schumer previously faced a lot of scrutiny for playing ball with Republicans last time around. How are Democrats approaching this current moment?
Right. In March, Schumer caught a lot of flack from Democrats, particularly more progressive Democrats, who were saying that the Trump administration was moving forward with a lot of policies that were enraging them. And Democrats, in this town, in this moment in Washington, don't really have a lot of leverage over Republicans, right? There's what's known as a trifecta of the GOP here. They have control of the House of Representatives in Congress, the Senate, Senate and the White House, as well as the Supreme Court. So Democrats wanted Schumer to use that leverage being a 60 vote threshold in the Senate that is needed to pass funding bills to keep the federal government's lights on in order to pressure the Trump administration into some concessions.
All right, so Zach, as we're talking, does it appear there's any progress toward a deal? What are some of the key holdups at this point?
I was interested, Taylor, to see whether or not Chuck Schumer in particular and leaders of the Democrats in Congress would see what Russ Vought, the head of the Office of Management and Budget in the Trump administration, see if his claims with respect to potential firings and reductions in force in the event of a shutdown, whether that would change the calculus of Democrats at all. But right now, it doesn't seem as though they are all too worried about any sort of firings, although Chuck Schumer was part of his rationale in March when he decided to vote with Republicans to keep the government open, that he was worried about further reductions in the federal workforce. Now he seems to believe that agencies have really cut their staffs to the furthest extent possible. And if agencies were to cut any more workers, that could be in violation of federal law, and lawsuits could bring those workers back. So it's going to be interesting to see how OMB responds to those demands from Democrats. Essentially, Democrats are just trying to call the administration's bluff, but we have seen that the Trump administration doesn't seem to be too worried about endangering the livelihoods of a lot of federal workers.
So, in terms of what's next, Zach, I guess we're just a few days out from the government potentially shutting down, right?
Right. So government funding is set to expire at 12:01 a.m. on October 1st. That's going to be next Wednesday. We will see federal funding start to expire and the government is going to shut down. It's an open question whether or not Republicans and Democrats are going to sort of change their political strategies here after we enter into a shutdown. The refrain that I keep coming back to is that it's easy to get into a shutdown. It's hard to get out of one. And it's still not entirely clear what the plan is to get out of one, or if Democrats are going to budge on some of their demands related to extending healthcare subsidies and reversing Medicaid cuts, which is what they've really entrenched in right now.
Zach Shermley covers Congress for USA Today. Zach, some pivotal days ahead, to say the least. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Taylor. Say a prayer for me. I'll need coffee in the coming days.
The top Justice Department official reportedly directed several federal prosecutor offices to investigate billionaire liberal donor George Soros' Open Society Foundations network. That comes just weeks after President Trump posted on social media that Soros and his son should be criminally charged. A senior Justice Department official issued the order in a letter to at least a handful of U.S. attorneys' offices, according to reports from the New York Times and ABC News. The letter reportedly listed various potential charges for prosecutors to consider, including providing material support to terrorism, committing arson, and racketeering. The grant-giving network said in a statement that the Open Society Foundations unequivocally condemn terrorism and do not fund terrorism, and that the network's work in the U.S. is aimed at strengthening democracy and upholding constitutional freedoms. Amazon has agreed to pay what the Federal Trade Commission has called a historic $2.5 billion settlement after it was accused of manipulating customers into getting and keeping Prime subscriptions. The FTC filed an antitrust lawsuit against the company in 2023, alleging it had enrolled millions of consumers in Prime subscriptions without their consent and then made the subscriptions difficult to cancel. At the time, Amazon called the suit proof that the FTC had radically departed from its mission of protecting consumers and competition, but the company has now settled the case just as the trial was beginning. Around 35 million Prime customers will be eligible for payout from the settlements fund. Amazon did not admit wrongdoing as part of the settlement, but the company agreed to adhere to several changes to its interface. The Amazon case was behind a broader push from consumer advocates and regulators to establish easier ways to cancel subscriptions to streaming services, gym memberships, food deliveries, and more. Thanks for listening to The Excerpt. We're produced by Kaylee Monahan, and our executive producer is Laura Beatty. You can get the podcast wherever you get your pods, and you can always email us at podcasts@usatoday.com. I'm Taylor Wilson. I'll be back tomorrow with more of the Excerpt from USA Today.